again and welcome to another episode of the Pictish Saints Trail. In my previous video you were introduced to St Drosten, a Pictish saint who evangelised much of Pictland. Today I introduce to you another Pictish saint, but one with a plethora of names, variations such like Erchard, Wychard, Merchard, just there to confuse the unwary researcher. But he's commonly known as Erchard, and that's what I'll call him. So again we discover a hagiography of a somewhat elusive saint that could be muddled with several of the better known saints of his era. Unlike many stories of these Pictish saints, there is the inevitable story about a holy bell. And I'm pleased to relate that although his legend has survived and deserves to be heard again, the same cannot be said of his famous holy bell, more of which I shall reveal later. It's said that St Erchard was born to pagan parents at the Pictish settlement, whose remains may still be seen on the hills above Tormods, a few miles to the north of Kincardine-O'Neill, known by the locals as Kinkar. The extract from the 16th century Aberdeen Breviary discloses that from his childhood years, Erchard began a holy life that included fasting, vigils and prayers, whilst detesting the manners and vices of evil and wicked men. The extract continues by informing us that in his early youth, Erchard embraced the Christian faith, and as a student he was mentored by the holy Saint Ternan at Banchory. Bangor is a term used to denote a Christian seat of learning and instruction. Erchard was subsequently ordained priest by his mentor, collaborating with Ternan in his future missionary endeavours and becoming one of his greatest disciples. Another legend tells of his visit to Rome, where Erchard is ordained and by the ordained bishop by Pope Gregory, before returning to Pictland for his mission amongst the Picts. Erchard's story may be of some significance in the primary evangelisation of Pictland. This almost overlooked and unknown saint should surely be ranked equally with those early Pictish missionaries like Nathlin, Ternan, Drosten, even St Ninian. Erchard's mission to spread the Christian faith, encouraged by Ternan, also followed in the footsteps of his predecessor St Ninian, travelling through the Great Glen, known in ancient times as the Valley of the Saints, which is the supposed route taken by St Ninian on his return to Whitehall. Erchard's missionary work was mainly amongst the Picts and must have been a major influence on the primary evangelisation of the Pictish nation. Perhaps his evangelising achievements were the reason why Columba found it relatively easy to be a catalyst in the famous alleged conversion of High King Bruda when the two met a century or more later near Inverness. The fact that Erchard, like Ternan, Drosten and Nathlin, was a Pict himself and understood and spoke the language was a major advantage in his missionary endeavours to proclaim and explain the gospel to the Picts. Local legend tells us that Erchard, with two of his companions on his mission northwards, journeyed via the Moonshire at Clova, close to Lumsden, and then onwards to that at Dunbeath and Strathclass. Whilst in Strathclass, he discovered 3 bright new bells buried in the earth at the foot of a certain tree, and he resolved to end his wanderings and found a new church at the place where the bell rang of its own accord for the third time. So taking one bell for himself, he gave the others two to his fellow missionaries, bidding each to erect a church on the spot where this bell should ring of its own accord for the third time, and agreeing to do likewise with regard to his own bell. One of those companions founded a church at Glenconved in Strathclass, another at Broadfoot on the Isle of Skye, and Erchard eventually arrived at Glenmorrison on the banks of Loch Ness, and here the bell rang for the first time at the place known in English as St. Erchard's Seat. The second time it rang was at the place known in English as St. Erchard's Well at Ballintombue, Glenmorrison, where a spring of excellent quality water still bears his name. The third time the bell rang was at a spot beside the River Morrison, known afterwards in English as St. Erchard's Church. A bell locally associated with the saint lay preserved there for centuries on top of a tombstone in the burial ground at St. Erchard's Church. And although the building gradually fell into decay in the early 17th century, the bell remained in the churchyard, resting on a narrow pointed spar of granite. Although the spar remains in situ, the bell was removed by some strangers visiting around 1873 and has never been returned. So, there's another bell legend about a bell with various miraculous properties that included curing the sick if they touched it in faith, and the bell finding its way back if removed from the clachan, the bell ringing of its own accord when a funeral was approaching the graveyard, and finally if the bell was cast on the water, then the bell would float onto its surface. Enough said about bells. Like his predecessors Ninian and Ternan, Erchard journeyed to Rome, where Pope St. Gregory, on hearing of his sanctity, consecrated him as bishop, and when he returned to Alba with the permission and blessing of the Pope, he ended his days in mission in the area which is now known as Aberdeenshire, where after a prolonged illness he died. Another wee story relates that the spot where the cart which was carrying his body to burial was miraculously stopped. Erchard was laid to rest, and a church was erected in his memory at the place that we now know as Kincardine O'Neill. It was the norm in the Scottish medieval period for annual fairs to be celebrated in the locus of saints on their feast day, and from the 24th of August the annual fair was held at Kincardine O'Neill and throughout the octave thereafter. Sadly, like many of these feast days and fairs and celebrations, they're no longer a part of life here in Scotland. As I previously mentioned, another church dedicated to St. Erchard was located at Glenmorrison, with an ancient burial ground adjoining it, where you can still find a few stones from the old building scattered around. So there we are. You've now heard a few wee stories about the elusive St. Erchard, the Pictish evangelist. Next month, I want to talk about St. Ninian, whose feast day is celebrated, and we'll take the opportunity to learn a wee bit more about Scotland's proto-evangelist. Till then, take care and God bless you. Bye for now.